Good evening, everybody. It's October 10th. This is the Littleton City Council study session at 6:30 in the evening on a Tuesday. So we must be having a study session or a regular meeting. Tonight, there are three topics on our agenda. One of them will be an ordinance review that we'll potentially see again at a regular meeting. And items number 2 and 3 are, number 3 we'll probably see again as a lease agreement. And item number 2 is a little bit of discussion about priorities, which may result in something coming to us in a future meeting, but it's more of a discussion topic. So with that, I'd like to start with agenda item 1A, ordinance 30-2017. This is an ordinance review amending the 2017 Littleton Stormwater and Flood Management Utility Budget. And I'll point out that there are a couple ordinances, a resolution, an agreement, and there are some PowerPoint and some pictures for tonight, all part of that one discussion. And I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Reister.
Thank you. Keith Reister, Acting Public Works Director. Joining me tonight is Carolyn Roan. She's new to our team in the engineering group. Her specialty is stormwater, and it's not a space we've really had before. As we've discussed before, we're having a change of staffing due to retirements in our engineering group, and so we're aligning ourselves a little bit differently. So she brings a great amount of expertise to our group in that particular area.
You probably nobody named Stormy.
We tried, but, you know, the only person we found was Stormy Runoff, and that was it. So that's the only person we could get. So tonight we're actually going to, this particular item is in preparation to bring this a change in appropriation and an intergovernmental agreement to council related to a project that we need to accelerate here in the community due to some significant erosion issues on a project that we've already started in partnership with Urban Drainage and Flood Control District. So that's what we're going to touch base about. What we're going to go through is sort of how we got here, what the project looks like, what the expenditures are, and how our partnership with Urban Drainage and Flood Control kind of operates, so that you understand how we're going to get there. And then the other part of this, to highlight something that we've sort of we've highlighted in a couple of our previous meetings, is we're still in the process of overall assessing the condition of our stormwater assets and where they fall, and how good they are in some areas and how poor they are, and where we're falling down and we're standing up as a community, and how they also comply with our requirements under our MS4 permit. And so this is an example of why we need to continue that process so that we have less of these surprises along the way. Sometimes Mother Nature will surprise you no matter what you do, but our goal is to reduce that as much as possible. So with that, I'm going to ask Carolyn to kind of go through some stuff and turn it over to her.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody. So specifically what this ordinance revision is asking for is another $100,000 to be added into the 2017 Storm and Floodplain Enterprise Fund to help pay for this stream stabilization project along the reach of Jackass Gulch. Jackass Gulch is a tributary of the South Platte River. It runs mostly on the north side of Mineral Avenue, just right on the north side, and there's a trail that runs for a portion of that length. And this specific reach is adjacent to Long Avenue. So in this red box is roughly the area we're talking about. The flow in Jackass Gulch is where all those trees and whatnot are located. And so the flow is going to the left or westward toward South Platte River. Just some history. There was an erosion problem first noted at this location by the homeowner in 2006, and the city met with Urban Drainage and Flood Control District at that time, but a project was not initiated. Then this came up again in 2013 because with all the big rains that occurred in that year, there was a lot of sediment observed coming down toward the South Platte River in South Platte Park, and just recently there had been a river restoration project that had been installed along the South Platte River, and they were really worried about all these fines, silts and sands coming down and affecting or impacting the restoration project they had implemented. So as a result of that, an IGA was initiated with Urban Drainage and Flood Control District in 2014 to begin the design of the project. And then there was a public meeting in November 2015, and there was a lot of support from the adjacent residents. They were really interested in this. From what I mean, I'm new to the city, but from what I understand, this erosion, which you can see in a picture right here, is migrating closer and closer to some of these homes with every significant storm, so they're quite worried about it.
It's easier to fish.
In 2017, just recently, Urban Drainage selected a contractor called ECI to build the project. This is part of their Project Partners contracting process that they have set up with specialized contractors that are really good and experienced in stream stabilization work. And ECI is on their pre-qualified list, basically. Littleton had $200,000 allocated in the CIP, in Urban Drainage's capital improvement program for 2017. So Littleton was to provide $200,000 and Urban Drainage was to provide $200,000. That's how these capital improvement projects work with Urban Drainage. It's always a 50-50 split. However, we find ourselves in a position now near the end of 2017 where we don't have the full $200,000 remaining in our storm fund. And this is largely because of emergency repairs that had to occur last year on Lee Gulch at Broadway. I'm not sure if you're familiar with what happened there, but the culvert collapsed and part of Broadway started collapsing also. So, and we've just recently reached a settlement on that final payment to the contractor, and so that's used up a lot of our funds available. This is hard to read, but this is just an overview of kind of what the design looks like right now. Let's see. There's 5 drop structures, which they're a profile and a plan view up here. I'm happy to share any of the detailed plans with you all if you want to see them up close. And a lot of grading. This, as you can see in the picture, it's eroded down significantly, and there's steep, vertical, eroding banks, some of which I think are close to 20 feet high. So the grading necessary to restabilize these to, safe slopes, for instance, is a big earthwork endeavor in and of itself. And then there's these drop structures that are put in to help stabilize the longitudinal gradient of the creek so it doesn't keep downcutting like that. And then additional riprap that's put in between the drop structures to help stabilize the channel banks. Just an overview of the city's relationship with Urban Drainage and Flood Control District. Go ahead.
Can I ask a question before that? I understand the drop structures and the riprap.
Yeah.
I'm from Ohio, so we deal with a lot of stormwater issues there.
Sure.
And then I lived in Louisville for a while too, so it's a lot of that. Were there other alternatives that were looked at before deciding upon this particular design approach? And could you maybe talk a little bit about, are there alternative ways to address this and why this is the best solution?
Yeah. I don't, usually what happens when Urban Drainage gets a designer on board is they do evaluate different alternatives. I can look back and see, I don't know for sure what other alternatives were considered for this particular project, but I can tell you that with the magnitude of the longitudinal gradient through here, it's quite steep. And there's really, unfortunately, this is like one of the only, drop structures are the most common method that's used by Urban Drainage for a reason, because that's one of the only methods that really helps to hold the longitudinal gradient in streams that are this steep.
You might want to reach back to some of that and share
Yeah,
it.
sure.
Just to say what their sense is. I'm not second guessing them.
No.
Because this would probably be where I would be at as well, but I'm a layperson.
Yeah.
My experience with Urban Drainage is they've had a lot of options, because their last recourse, I know from a design perspective, is they always want to move towards a naturalized flow as much as possible, and to preserve wildlife habitat, to preserve riparian corridors and all those things. And so a highly involved structure like this is typically Urban Drainage's last resort from a design perspective, because one of their primary goals is resiliency and sustainability in our waterway corridors while we're out there, both for the short and long-term health of the areas.
Yeah, because I can tell you there's, at least historically, there's been a fox den along there, and that has caused a lot of joy.
We've had some beavers in there.
So, yeah.
Can you back up to the picture?
Pardon me?
Can you back up to the picture?
Of the design, like this?
No, the picture.
This one.
Yeah, so we're talking things that are in the bed, channeling the bed, are we? But what happens to that undercut upside?
Well, it's both, really, because in the process of it downgrading, what happens is as those banks get taller and taller, the flows eat away at the base of the channel bank, and then it makes it collapse, so it ultimately ends up moving over. Does that make some sense?
But
So there's
I'm just-
both going on.
I know that the river is, it's longer than what we see there.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I'm just looking at that particular piece, not knowing all the rest of it right there, although I have been in that area. Of what happens to that overhanging piece that's there?
Oh, from a construction standpoint, as was shown in the, if you went back to the other design, when you look at the sort of the topographic lines that are there, the creek bed will more than likely move as part of the project. That's how you get that grade and support going back to that bank structure. The creek is going to have to move some and have some grading in there to preserve that bank, so it doesn't continue to erode. So the grade there will change from a construction standpoint.
Right.
So basically what will happen is, from the angle that we had in the picture, the creek will move closer to you. And there'll be
That
more of a
house-
grade.
Yeah, but there's an overhanging piece
Right,
there.
and that will
so
be-
you get a lot of snow piling up and
That
stopping that.
That will
and
be
then
remedied when they regrade.
They'll regrade the bank?
That's correct.
Right, so
Okay,
it'll
that
have,
was what I
and the
was
channel
asking.
kind of
Okay.
moves this
Yeah, they'll
direction.
regrade the bank and the channel
Yeah.
comes towards us in that picture.
Okay.
So the creek would be closer and that's how you get the grade in there.
I was going to say, don't sit down.
Oh,
So,
okay. That house is located up here, this end of the project.
Right, and it looks like there's a couple places where they're reinforcing the bank along there, both in front of that house and what might be the
Right.
next one.
These are some boulder retaining walls to help, just to limit how much the channel has to move this way to accommodate those new slopes. And part of the reason for that is just off the picture here, there's a sanitary sewer line. They didn't want to move the channel so far over, and then it was going to be impacting that sanitary sewer. So that's part of the reason for those walls.
And with the homeowners or the property owners are aware of the grading difference, when it said public support, so.
We have had that one public meeting I mentioned, and we've had a number of meetings out in the field, and they've seen all these plans, and we've actually flagged out and marked the limits of all of the grading and explained that, yeah, this is all going to look really different. The vegetation's going to get pulled off. It'll all be replaced, but it's going to be really different in the process. So yeah, they're aware.
So, Matthew, vegetation does get replaced, and they're not going to look at it riprap.
No, yeah, absolutely. The riprap gets buried with some soil, and then it's revegetated on top of that. So, yeah, the grounded boulder drop structures themselves will be more visible just because they're going to have water flowing on them pretty often, and so the soil wouldn't stay there anyway. So they'll have kind of a waterfall look to them, which some people like.
That's good.
Yeah,
A question too on the bottom drawings that you have there.
yeah.
On the right side, it starts when, and the left side ends where?
So, this is the property I was showing in the photographs, and that is 2400 West Jameson, and this structure right here, it's hard to see, I know, in this plot, is this drop structure right here. And then it steps through, this structure here is this one.
And that is whereabouts?
Before
Windermere? I mean, not before Windermere.
Yes,
Before
it's
Jack.
well before Jack Haskell.
Before
Yeah, yeah, because.
So it's that spot right there is all we're looking
Yeah,
at.
this is the reach.
How many feet drop is that? A lot.
Should know that. I don't know, can I see?
My eyesight's not that good to pick that up.
See the bottom of the water as it angle.
It's about 20 feet, I think.
Is it?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, it's a
Great.
real steep
you.
section.
Good boy.
Tubing, yeah.
Just to keep going with some of this relationship, every year, Urban Drainage updates a 5-year capital improvement plan for all of the different counties within the district boundaries. And so upon request from the local agencies, including Littleton, projects are added to that CIP and dollar amounts are determined. And ultimately, Urban Drainage decides how much they're able to fund. They get all their money out from property tax mill levies. So they decide how much they can put to different projects with the expectation that the local agency matches that. Urban Drainage funds also go to routine maintenance. They go towards smaller restoration projects, repair and smaller construction projects, floodplain studies, master plan updates, all of those at the request of the local agency. And those other projects have very little or no local funding contributions. They fund almost all of that themselves. So it's only the capital improvement projects that really they're looking for the local agency for the matching funds. And just for your info, Littleton has routine maintenance performed on the South Platte River, Big Dry Creek, Lee Gulch, Littles Creek, and Slaughterhouse Gulch in the form of mowing and debris removal. So these are, I know this is a bunch of numbers here, but just
Back up 1 second. This is a minor issue, but I'm looking at the fourth bullet. So the Urban Drainage determines how much it can fund to each project, and the local agency must provide matching funds. So they're going to fund half.
right.
Right, so I'm trying to figure out their logic. If they're going to fund half, what if they could have they potentially might only have done half of that channel this year because they're only going to fund half of the cost and maybe the rest of it another year?
The way the district projects work, they aren't going to do those projects without our participation.
No, I know that. But if they're only going to do half, if it would have cost more to do that whole section, they would not have done the whole section. They would have done it in more than 1 year.
In any given calendar year.
Yeah.
So what will happen is the local agency will put forth a request for a certain amount of funding on a certain project based on how much the local agency feels that they can afford. They put that request in, and Urban Drainage determines how much they can contribute on every calendar year. So yes, some projects are going to extend out multiple years.
Okay.
And so it's matched 50-50 each year.
I was just trying to understand the larger picture.
Yeah, and the reason, they have to kind of they have to determine internally how much they can contribute, only because they've got a lot of municipalities, within multiple counties that all have their own requests as well.
Yeah.
And so there's a certain pot of money, and they kind of figure out how to divvy that up.
Thank you.
What happened in 2014? 2014 is when the first IGA was put together with Urban Drainage, and it was $225,000 from Urban Drainage and $225,000 from Littleton for $450,000, and that was used to kind of get started with the design. And there was various expenses initially associated with getting rid of some invasive tree species, the initial design of the project, environmental work, and then some culvert cleaning under Jackass Hill Road. So it left us with a balance this year, but there was an additional need for remaining design, construction costs, once we got some estimates from the contractor of what it was going to cost to implement the project, the way it was designed, and then remaining engineering, construction oversight costs, and some residential inspections. And this is something that Urban Drainage is now trying to do on all projects that are located really close to homes. They want to go in and they want to do a structural assessment of what the interior and exterior of the house looks like before construction, and they do it again afterwards to protect everybody, Urban Drainage, the city, the contractor, and also the residents themselves in the unlikely case that the construction does cause some damage due to the vibrations associated with the construction. And then we have a contingency in there for unknowns. And so it leaves a need of another $800,000 for the project. And so the funding, the way it looks here moving forward to finish off the project, in red there is kind of the amount that we're talking about tonight, which is the amount that we currently don't have remaining in our 2017 budget. The rest of these funds, we believe, will be available. So in red is what we're talking about tonight.
So we come up with 100,000, so will urban drainage?
Yes, yeah. And so if we don't come up with the 100,000, then we lose that match as well. So it sets us back even further. And as I mentioned, the owners are very anxious. They've been waiting for this for a while. The contractor ECI is ready to begin construction in early November, pending having enough funds in the account to get going. What Urban Drainage wants to avoid is having them get started with a limited amount of money and then using that money up, and then there's a gap while they wait for additional funding to come in. So there's a possibility that it might have to wait till December to start. They're expecting that the in-channel work with the grouted boulders, the riprap, and the grading will take about 3 to 4 months, and then all the revegetation and plantings would come in the fall when the weather conditions are more favorable for that. And in conclusion, we're seeking council approval to reallocate those monies toward the project so we can maximize Urban Drainage's match. We do have $100K remaining in the fund at the end of this year to help provide for a portion of it.
So, council questions?
I just had two. One of them's a minor point, and that's on the staff communication. This is more for Mark. Under background,
Yes.
in paragraphs 1 and 3, it refers to it as West Jameson Street, and I think the map you had earlier is actually West Jameson Way, so
That's true.
just a minor clerical thing. Number two, to do this, and obviously this needs to be done, but we moved the money out of Rules Creek. What are we giving up there?
Yeah. One of the things that we've been putting some money into, starting in 2015, actually, was Littles Creek at Gallup and Peakview intersection. That's an intersection that floods pretty frequently. So we would be deferring putting money into that account by $100,000 in order to get this one finished. But it is still the intention to keep putting the funding into that so that can be built as well.
I'm sure it won't rain between now and then. It's not a problem. It won't be an issue at all. Our latest weather would indicate that, so it won't be a problem.
Other questions from staff?
Their properties actually extend pretty far to the south. Is any of this
Yes.
going to be on private property?
There is an easement, a drainage way easement, but it is on private property.
So the easement takes care of whatever issues we have about this being on private property.
If I may, just following up on that, are those easements executed at this point? They are, okay.
They've been in place, they were executed, I believe, when actually all those homes were built.
Oh,
It's more than likely when it occurred, when the subdivision occurred.
okay.
Yeah, thank you for that, Charles. Second question is, are we not starting to December because we don't have a meeting in November where we can do the second reading in this? Is that the issue?
I'll answer that. I mean, as the Public Works Director, the current council policy is to come to you in a study session for any ordinance, and then we have to bring it to you for a first reading and a second reading. So we're in a position where we would like to accelerate the project, but because of the council requested schedule, we're basically on a 7 to 8 week schedule in order to get an appropriation in place to make this happen. So that's why you see the timeline that's executed there.
So the first reading would be in October,
Be next meeting, I think is the intent.
That's right.
and then the second reading would be,
2 weeks later.
No, after the
No,
election.
Oh, that's right.
Because you have no meeting.
well, I guess that's the point I'm getting to.
Yeah.
This project is looking important enough that it may be worthwhile this just meeting to approve this on second reading.
I agree with Council.
No problem, if that's what council would like, we can
Yeah.
certainly accommodate that.
Say that again, Doug.
November 7th.
It's looking like this is important enough that we can meet and just approve the second reading on the 7th,
Or the 4th, is it?
or whenever it is.
Yeah.
7th is the Tuesday.
Some folks in this room know election day, what that is closer than others, so.
I know what it is.
Yeah, we can easily accommodate that, council, if you'd like to.
It's a shame to hold it up for another
Yeah.
month because of that.
We appreciate that.
That would be great.
Excellent, thank you. Thanks, Carolyn, appreciate it. I got it, I'll take care of that.
The next presentation is going to be by Mr. Reister also.
Well, I'm going to have some company up here from the Community Development Director as well.
Do you need a moment to set up, or you're good?
No, we're good.
Okay, so I need to announce it. It's
Well, when I get.
agenda item D.
You don't want to sprint it across the room.
It's agenda item D. It's ID 17-299, Development and Engineering Code Priorities. And there was a PowerPoint given to us in our handouts, which we're going to be presenting tonight.
Thank you, Keith Reister, Acting Public Works Director, if our fans are just tuning in out there.
Jocelyn Mills, Community Development.
So we're going to tag team this one tonight, and what our objective is council has, over the course of the last year, set some critical priorities, and so we're here to talk to you about how we in Community Development and Public Works are addressing those, what the schedule is related to some of those priorities, and what you can expect going forward. Our goal here is to update you on those, reaffirm the direction that we're going, and answer any questions about the strategy that we're following to get there. So that's really what we're here. And you know, what we're going to talk about is updating the code and the regulatory environment that we have. And you know, we've kind of put this up there, pieces of the puzzle, because they all kind of fit together as you go forward in order to deliver services here in the community. And we're actually talking about this in our staff meeting today in Public Works, that we actually have sections of the transportation code which haven't been updated since the Carter administration. So you kind of put that in perspective. So we're kind of targeting some opportunities there, and that's really our goal right here. So
That's a great way for us to have a reference to the past. Now we're going to do it by presidential administration.
That's correct.
That's right.
We found some zoning code from the 50s. I guess I'll have to research who the president was.
That's correct. So the Eisenhower administration, right? At that time. So yeah. So
Truman, then Eisenhower.
we'll research which time they came in. So our objectives tonight, as I covered, are to outline the code updates and change activities in support of your goals. Share our current schedule, constraints, and challenges, which are part of this, and understanding how we're going to deliver that, and also gauging your ideas, your concerns, your observations as we go through this, so that we're going to be as effective as possible in delivering those services.
So just a quick slide here to remind you of some of the other priorities that you have on your list, because that also is part of our work plan, specifically the design guidelines. That was in priority for as of this, I believe in July is when you last discussed these. The corridor plan for Bellevue, as well as the visioning strategic planning process. And I know we had Golden here a few weeks ago to talk about their process. So those are just the other things that are out there as we try to balance moving forward on the key projects, the zoning, subdivision, land use updates, area plans, including the mineral station, and then obviously the transportation design studies.
So that's kind of on the target list and how we drill down into that. So we wanted to touch as a staff on why we believe it's important to support your efforts here, and also why we think in the bigger picture it's important to take on the code. We feel like currently the code, there's sections of the code that exist that do not reflect our community values, whatever they might be defined as, but as a community, we have values that say we want efficient and effective government. We want consistency of service delivery. Those things are important to us, and so we need to have code that reflects us and allows us to do that. The framework, as Mark has said in some of our meetings recently, is vision to comp plan to code, and this is part of that, having a code that supports the direction and the vision that council has set. In all honesty, poor code can be a hindrance to the delivery of services. on an efficient and effective manner. An example of that for us is inconsistent code makes every development review application that comes in essence, a one-off application. And so from a staffing perspective, you're spinning your wheels a lot of the time trying to react to things over and over again because there's a lack of clarity and consistency in the code. We definitely have this on the traffic side, for example. And that's what creates that inconsistency of application as well. Because you go through that process and every instance, someone would like to negotiate a different alternative or a different solution, which is fine, but we need to start at a foundation that allows us to work successfully. And then finally, it also enhances government transparency. And that is very important in today's world. We feel that the business that we do needs to be transparent to our community members, and that's important to us.
So again, what Keith is just saying, this is our slide relative to give you the goals and the process. So really looking at our code and where the gaps are on the immediacy between the code and the community value. We do want to make sure that we have code that's responsive and displays practices that are what we see in the world today, so like design standards that are modern and efficient, as well as zoning provisions. For consistency, predictability, for community, our citizens, businesses, developers, really everyone. Staff, council, commissions, everyone. And we do believe that moving forward and making some of these changes will enhance staff efficiency as well as productivity.
As an example, one of the things that, as we move forward, say on the transportation side, is we need to develop a set of design standards that are not necessarily laid out in the code. An example of why that's important is because in the transportation world, both operationally and from a regulatory situation, things can change frequently. And so if it's in your code, you don't have an ability as a community to be nimble and to adapt to those changes. One example that exists in Littleton is that at a time in the past, the standards for the width and spacing of handicap parking spaces were added to the code. That particular provision of the code has not been in compliance with federal law for at least a decade. And it's in your code. And so this is a spot where having it set up in a way that allows you to react to those changes, to provide consistency, without having to jump through the hoops to change the code every time on something like spacing and width of handicap spaces, that's something that's important to us. So that's why we're attacking issues like this.
I think just one other thing before we move up.
I have a question. So on the very first bullet, the developed code that reflect Littleton's community values. Give me an example of one.
Okay, your community survey, I'll jump in. Sure, your community survey says that your number one issue here is congestion. And if we have transportation standards that continue to add to congestion, then we are not reflecting transportation standards that are reflecting our community values to provide a quality of life and quality transportation network. So that would be an example.
Okay, thank you.
If I may just add into that, I think we've talked to council in the past that engineering design standards, we don't have the common level of service congestion standard in our code. And so we have not been able to effectively, in my view, critique a lot of the projects and hold them to an accountable standard. So it's just flat missing. So I think those are the kinds of engineering standards we'd like to put in place to provide a little deeper review and accountability.
Yeah, and Jocelyn, you can share some examples related to zoning and design standards like that if you like.
Right, we have several, right? So the approach we're looking at is bringing some of those immediate ones forward, and we're going to get into that list here in a minute. But that's how we want to slowly tackle this entire litany of things we know we need to get in there and update relative to all of those.
So recognizing you want to start getting the hands dirty on these areas that we have these levels of inconsistency or just neglect and bringing them up to even current federal laws, if that's the case. We also talk about what's the risk in leaping ahead of the vision, comp plan, code approach that also has logic to say, hey, that's how we're sure we're going to be with the community's values or not.
certainly we think from a staff perspective that some of the things like transportation design standards, design guidelines, as a council, you've already enunciated that those are important. And so we're going to be moving forward with those. That's why we're here to reaffirm that tonight. We believe that, like in our area, the transportation design standards, it is important. They're going to be very reflective of standard industry practices. There's nothing that's going to say we're going to make every section a roundabout, for example, going forward in there. You know, we're going to be, and we'll have iterations of those that'll come to council along the way, so we make sure we're reaffirming that as we go. And so the downside to waiting through that process is we'll be here 2.5 years from now in the same spot if we don't start proceeding now. So you can't eat the whole elephant at one time. You gotta take some bites along the way, and so we're trying to take some bites out of the elephant.
You're trying to truncate the process.
Very much so.
I think I would,
I missed the rim shot on that.
I think the one thing I would add to that is also on the zoning side, the things that we really need to work on in the immediacy is more the performance standards and some of those, how those things are interpreted, and make them as clear and as concise as possible, because those things are going to happen. And the bigger direction ones, doing the vision to comp plan to code, the things that we'll be waiting on are the much bigger discussions about each of the zone districts, and are they the right areas for those, and you know, all of those kind of bigger picture that will be from community input, vision and whatnot. Those things will wait, but we're really talking about now taking on some of the performance standards and getting started with those things that we know we need to clean up.
And if I may, I think we, in the past with council, we've characterized this as our top 10 list. I think there actually are 10 this time around here. So these are the things that we see as have been real immediate problems here that we've been experiencing. Some of these I think you're going to recognize here. And so this is our opportunity to kind of check in.
We do want to highlight that one of the big challenges for us as a team is capacity issues. Because one of the challenges is we've got a whole load of day-to-day things that have to occur, responding to developers, responding to citizen issues. You know, this week traffic lights going out because of power loss, those kind of things. So one of our issues is really some capacity issues in our ability to deliver that. We're going to need to utilize consultants in a number of cases to help us get there. As well as it just doesn't affect our staff, it also affects Steve and his team, because every component of this needs to work through our legal team as well. So between the three of us, our departments are, you know, we're paired together at the hip in order to deliver these, and so that's an important component of this. And as well, to highlight something that Jocelyn shared.
Development applications, I think we shared this during the budget, and as Mark said, maybe I understated it when I said we were busy, but we are busier than we have been, so that word there is just to reiterate that point.
So these are the top 10 A list. We call them A's and B's in this particular category. So Jocelyn's at the top of the A list tonight.
So, and again, to Mark's point, we've tried to say, hey, here's our top 10. We have lists of code things that we want to, performance standards that we want to take on. What we've tried to do is create the ones that are the most pressing, and so we provided that into an A list, and then we'll get to the B list. But these are the things that we're working on right now, and both with Public Works Engineering, Keith, and with legal staff. So subdivision code, as you know, we did the Chapter 9, which was the exemption, and so we made changes to that. But really, we need to now look at the remainder of that, Chapters 1 through 8. And just one of the bigger highlights of that is one of the things we're going to have a conversation about is right now, if you do a condominium, I can't say that word, or a townhome project in Littleton, you don't come through the city for final plating. That all goes to the county. So there's just some of those kind of big things in addition to the engineering standards.
You say it goes to the county?
That is.
You better say that again, make sure the council understands that. I'm not even sure they're aware of it.
I hadn't been aware of it until I started here. So right now in our subdivision code, the only things that we see, we the city on some level, would be if you have a subdivision of, you're dividing land, more than 10 lots, less than 10, or 1 or 2. If you are doing a condominium or a townhome project, which is, it will still remain one larger land, but you're dividing, carving up the individual lots, whether it's townhome or condo is really the legal mechanism, that those do not come through the city's process. Those go to the county. We've had it in the code that way since it appears it was created. So that's one of the topics, I'm just giving you an example, that we would like to bring forward and talk about and see if it makes sense that we would want to include that into our subdivision code.
Is there any other work we can pawn off to the county?
Well, we could look at it that way too.
You could, by code, hey, by code, let's,
Yeah, so that's one. Sign code, I know a while back we had a conversation about downtown and the sandwich board signs, and so we're working with Steve on that and making a few more tweaks about murals and some other things, so sign code is on the A list as well. The next one, PDO and landscaping. Our plan development overlay, that's what that stands for, and right now you can really use that in any of our zone districts. I mean, I'm not sure that's the direction from the community. What we would like to do is limit that so that you would not be able to use it in any R zone district, PD,
Or mobile home.
or mobile home. Right now, you cannot use it in a mobile home district. So we'd like to expand that because we think that that currently has the ability to potentially have some unintended consequences in our residentially zoned areas. PDO really allows you to get a waiver, if you will, from height, parking, and some other performance standards in exchange for enhanced design is what the code says. And I'm just not sure that that's really what we want to be in our R zone district. So again, this is all stuff that will come before you. It's not like you're deciding yes or no tonight, but just that's kind of the gist of that one. And then landscaping and open space. This I know in several of the more recent projects that have come to council and planning commission, how we manage landscaping, unobstructed open space. We know we want some tweaks to that. So that's on the A list as well. And then we just had a study session on the preliminary project plan, which we still haven't come up with a better name, but anyway, that's out there. And then the other one, as you know, a few months ago, we did update our wireless telecommunication code based on state and federal laws that have passed. And so this is just a big project. So the next part of that is working with our consultant, Ken Fellman, and Public Works and legal on a master license template for these wireless companies that want to come into Littleton's right of way. So that's just another thing that maybe wasn't necessarily on council priority list, but it's coming forward as a priority based on the state and federal laws that have come into play recently, and this is a big one as far as time and how we're going to manage that. So more to come on that.
The two on the A list from Public Works, we've talked extensively before about the transportation design standards. The other one, the right-of-way management, is in a way related to the master license agreement, the telecommunications. We've sort of inconsistently applied how we deal with organizations and companies extending fiber in our community, as an example. We currently have 2 right-of-way applications in right now. And then within our current right-of-way regulations, we have a great deal of inconsistency related to repairs. And a perfect example of this is right here at the end of West Barry, right over in this neighborhood, there's some cable work, some underground cable work going in, and they're doing potholing in the sidewalk. Currently, our code does not require them to go back with concrete where they took concrete out. And so what will happen is they'll go back in with asphalt, and now it's springtime, and 6 months later, and it's settled, and so we have all these little, kind of basically 6-inch discs of potholes, and they're all over town actually already. So I think they proliferate like tribbles in Star Trek or something. So that's an example of where we'd like to tighten up the consistency, provide some greater clarity. And the other part of that is, one of our primary goals across all of this is providing consistency for the people that do business with us. So that if someone comes in to pull a permit, if a developer comes in to look at a project in our community, or someone's looking from an economic development perspective, our ability to provide consistency in responding to those will enhance our ability to provide good service as well as provide reliability for the customers that we work with. And that's something that we have consistently heard back to us that is important in how we deliver services here. So here's kind of a schedule and a breakdown. We thought this was important to put in. You can kind of see how we've laid it out basically over the next 6 or 7 months for each of those areas. We also put that scale in over to the right, which shows which certain ones will interact with Planning Commission, which ones will come back to Council, which is all, which one will require or planned on public/stakeholder input as part of it. For example, if we're going out to take a look at what we're doing with certain design standards, we're going to want to touch base with the development community and those kind of businesses that interact with us to give feedback along the way. So stakeholder interaction as well as public interaction. We also highlighted the 4 projects that we know are going to include additional consultant or legal services that are a specialty area that we're going to need to deliver. The biggest one of those is the transportation standards. We've already budgeted that 151. It's not like that's a new expenditure. We've already gone through about 50 of that through phase 1, and we're actually next week we have our first kickoff meeting for phase 2 to drive that next chunk forward with FHU. So that's kind of the schedule we're at right now. We wanted to share that with you, and this is a point we wanted to get feedback on as well as we go forward. And then here's the B list. I don't know if this adds up to 10 either. It does actually. Now that I look at it, the B list is 10 as well.
Oh, it is?
It is. I just did that calculation while I was there. So, we can answer any questions about any of these particular items if you'd like to. And these are kind of a secondary run that will take a little more time, but are also important as well. And these are the ones that we'll be stepping to after we move through the stuff that we saw on the A list.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, I want to add a little detail there on the Transportation Engineering Design Standards, or TEDS. I have to have an acronym. It's going to be similar to how the city manages our stormwater manual. If you remember, the council actually adopted the urban drainage manual. And so when Keith was talking about earlier here how we take things out of the code, we're actually going to put them into a manual for which then the council would adopt, typically by resolution, if I'm not mistaken. But it's a way for us to update the manual a little more easily, but still required as kind of a code requirement, if that makes sense.
Very common practice in
Yes.
the industry. Very common practice. So, go ahead.
It's something that may be buried within the A and B, or maybe it flows from the vision comp plan code. I've received some comments about how folks are looking to make changes to their home or their property, and those standards, at least they feel, are different than if someone was coming in with a new build. So that, and in fact, a scrape might be treated more favorably than a renovation. Does that get addressed in any of this, or those kinds of issues?
Relative to building codes, is that what you're asking, or zoning codes?
I'm going to say building, because they're not.
No, I mean, in the world of development, right, there's zoning and that
Right,
kind of
these
manages
have got
their
to be in the
site.
building section.
And building, you know what, I'm not going to be able to address that right now, but I can certainly share it with council and ask the building official that. I know oftentimes it's more complex when you're adding an addition than when you're creating something from scratch, right? Because if something was built several years ago, then there's new codes that the old house may have, you know what I mean, been built under a different code. So I know the building code is a way to address that, but in practical sense, it can be more challenging when you have that. But I'll certainly find out a little bit more information about it, because I don't know.
So you're going so fast, I'm not sure that I understood one of those. The roundup calculation?
Sure, if I didn't know when, I'm happy to walk through these generally. So right now in Littleton zoning code, we don't have anything to say. So we have different requirements that have a fraction associated with them. So like for example, the parking for multifamily is 1.5 per unit. Well, We don't have anything that would say you have to round that up. So if you're building.
Okay, that's okay.
That's what I mean. So a rounding factor to tell you at what point do you have to round up or round down.
Yeah, it's probably round hyphen up. I might have.
Oh, fair, that's probably, that's true.
I thought we
Yes.
had a herd of something
Yes.
we were.
It feels like we're hurting the
Like rounding
code.
up, like, it does feel like that.
Additional questions?
Okay.
Justin, I don't think you need to go through each.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
we just wanted to see.
Unless
Just
some
wanted-
specific questions on it.
Unless anyone has
So
questions,
I think
sure.
we'll see, almost every one of those looks like a study session, honestly.
Yeah, oh yes, absolutely. This is not, we're gonna move anything forward without bringing it, obviously, to you guys first.
So we wanted to, flip back, we showed you the work plan on our side, but we also wanted to let you know the expectations of the work plan on council's side, would be the way to put this. And so we're obviously here tonight. And then there is a schedule for a joint council and planning commission meeting. You've discussed that recently. And then between now and May, as we develop things, as we do study sessions on those, we're going to loop back with you. As we go through that, we're going to be doing those things with planning commission and that kind of thing along the way.
Meetings, whatever, we need to do based on the topic.
And then February is kind of a projected time frame for annual city council retreat. And then hopefully we're going to be here in May and we're going to have checked a lot of those, we're going to have checked those boxes on the A list, and we'll be talking about moving to the B list and going through a similar presentation on that. So that's really what we wanted to give you an update on, get any feedback, commentary, questions, ideas, that kind of thing.
So, without trying to bring up bad history, but there was a period of time we couldn't get the planning commission to even meet.
Yeah.
I mean, there was just nothing for them to do. And it's, of course, it's quite an awakening when you look at this and see there was really quite a lot to do, and it's been existing for a period of time. So, with that comment, now we're going to pile on the planning commission. So, help me understand how we do that in a way that, for citizen volunteers, their times, plus the other work that we have, because it seems to me that that is a weak link, potentially, or choke point.
If I may, I kind of commented on this. It's a great question. And I commented on this on my weekly report to council on Friday. We do have a joint meeting with the planning commission here. 19th. We do need to draft an agenda. I was going to share that for council review and discussion there. But I believe, quite honestly, things like this are what we need to identify for the planning commission. Talk through that, make sure they understand kind of the support that we're going to be providing them as they kind of move through these topics.
Because it would seem to me that if, and not to micromanage it, but if they knew what was coming and they could look at it over an extended period of time, like a year's schedule or something, and always 90 days out, or something like that, that puts them in a position to prepare and be ready for what's going to be a tremendous amount of work. And then also they can have some buy-off and ownership, perhaps, of that calendar and that schedule and their time commitment.
In Mayor Council, we've been working with not just the Planning Commission, we have it also coming up with the Historic Preservation Board and some of the other boards on trainings and things on how to do business better. So we're helping them, working with Jocelyn and her staff, and we've done some of that with the Building Board of Appeals, different things we can do to help those boards all be able to be as efficient as they can, because they do know that they have a lot of things coming down the road, so we're working very hard on that.
To point to what you're saying, Mayor, it's important for us as a staff. The last thing we want to do is all of a sudden have this rush of information go to a board or a commission at the last minute and expect them to have absorbed that, discussed it, come to a decision, and make a good quality decision. That's not the position that we want to put our citizen volunteers in on our boards and commissions. So it's our intent as a staff to be way out in front of that, to meter the workload to our boards and commissions. Because in order for us to be successful in this, they need to be successful, and that's very important to us.
So,
We need to manage too, because planning commission or other boards also, they have active cases that come in front of them too. So, they similarly to council have a tentative calendar that gives them tentative things looking out. So, we'll just manage it within that caseload too.
And again, just to throw it out, one of the concerns in the past was that perhaps staff and the citizen volunteers were not on the same sheet of music, or they weren't communicating, or, something wasn't happening where the maximum functioning and maximum opportunities were taken advantage of. So that's supervision, that's work. And so I hope, we're going to try to do that too.
I can speak for myself, but I also, I won't speak for Jocelyn, but we've talked about this. It's the collective at the leadership level that, in order for us to be successful as a community, that's really important. And we need, as a staff, we want to know that the direction we're going is we're working in partnership with the community, and they're leading us down that path, and that's part of that. It's knowing that we're going along stride to stride with them, and that's how we deliver great things for our community. So we're supportive of that across the board.
And I know you've put items by month on some of this, but as I look at this, at least with regard to council, there's going to be overlaps as to when discussions have happened and input has been received and deliberations have occurred, and if there is a legislative agenda that goes along with that, you aren't waiting for these to be pieced by piece. There's going to be an overlapping schedule, and so the better that that's understood as these get scoped out, so that, hey, we're on point C with one and we're on B with another, and those are going to be overlapping components.
And I think this is our best way to manage this, but also recognizing there could be other things that rise as a priority that we haven't even, they're probably on our list somewhere, but you know what I mean? Like, that's the other fluctuating part of this too. If there's other priorities that come up, that also, potentially changes how things process too.
To go to that comment, one of the things that, I can tell you this, as your acting public works director, that having a city manager that was a former public works director, he very much embraces things like Microsoft Project Schedule. So what you see here at the staff level will have a derivative schedule that's much more detailed than this. And so as we communicate back with you and projects get rolling, you will see that communicated back to you with the communications about where we are and where we're going. Because I can assure you at the staff level, that's a tool that we're going to be using, and we want to make sure you're as far ahead of the curve as possible too.
And the planning commission and the community, all of that has to be, to your point, part of these.
I don't want to dominate the whole thing, but I really am interested in this. Seeing the planning charts that were used, Microsoft Planning or whatever that was, have we adopted then and said that the staff will use that chart and that's what people are going to work with, and that's when council says where are we at? That's what we'll see, is are we going to get to that point? Because I think that helps everybody get on it. If we're all singing off a different sheet of music, it doesn't sound real good. And just from an organizational point of view, my best success in something that had nothing to do with the city was because I had a gatekeeper and a schedule keeper, and they were relentless. And we need to have that to get where we want to get, because honestly, we haven't gotten there yet.
Well, if I may, Mr. Mayor, and the department directors they've heard plenty from me on this topic here, and I think we're all united on the point that we need to be diligent in putting together a schedule and making sure that we talk through on a regular basis where we're at. We all know that schedules will change, but we want it to be a conscious decision. And so, yes, we are using Microsoft Project. You'll hear a little bit more about how we're going to manage this internally a little later, but I am looking at moving some resources around so that we have somebody on target. I'm not sure if the council is familiar with Microsoft Project. It doesn't necessarily have to be that, but it is a tool that can be very detailed. And I think in part because we want to make sure that we put all of these projects together and we see how they're all fitting over time. We don't want to do this ad hoc. It takes a lot of resources to make this happen, so we want to be successful, as Keith and Jocelyn said, not only with the council, but with the community. So we want to set proper expectations. So tonight is really important to make sure that you're okay roughly with this concept, and we will plow that into the schedule here in detail.
Yeah.
Additional comments?
And I'm sure having used Microsoft Project before, and understanding if there's any dependencies on the streams. and so that we're not messed up by the sequencing.
Point taken.
By the look of this picture, we no longer have a parking problem, so.
Progress already.
We fixed it.
It's all check.
It got really bright at 4 o'clock in the morning, I think is what happened with that picture, so.
It's a filter on your camera. But, okay, any more comments from council?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to both of you. It sounds really optimistic. This is tough. We've got to stick to it. Got to stick to it. Okay, it is 7:30. I think we can continue with it going along. I don't think we need a break. So this is, once again, Mr. Rooster, I believe.
Yep, the last and final one, I think, at this point tonight.
Okay, let me introduce it so people can index it if they're watching this. This is study session topic CID 17-300. It's the lease agreement for Romancing the Bean, and we were included a copy of that agreement and some information in our staff briefing.
So what we're going to talk about is, as you all know, I'm not putting PowerPoint together. You're all familiar with the old train depot that we have that sits down at the RTD downtown station. It's currently, the total square footage of that building is about 500 square feet. It's a historic structure. Any changes that we make to that structure have to go through historic preservation as well. And so that's kind of where we are. We've had this relationship over there. If you think of the station itself, and you take where that building is and draw a circle about 10 feet around out the outside of the building, that's the area that we manage and control. Everything outside of that is managed and controlled by RTD. In sort of,
You said 400 or 500, but isn't it 400?
I'll explain why there's a difference there in a second. The total structure interior is about 500 square feet. So that's kind of how the maintenance of the bigger area breaks down. And staff-wise, we just recently met with RTD to review that with them as well. So for the last several years, that space has been occupied by Romancing the Bean. Terry is here, so he'll be able to answer some questions. I'll have him come up here in a minute and share a couple of comments. Earlier this year, prior to my arrival here, you had a study session on this particular topic and gave direction to staff to pursue moving forward with securing a new lease for that location. That's what you're seeing here tonight. The lease that you see reflects, as you can see here, basically the things that it reflect are a 3-year lease with 2 one-year renewals. The rental rate, the lease rate is $1 a square foot, which is about half the rate of downtown's current rate in this particular marketplace. We confirm that with our economic development department. Some of the other changes that are in this lease going forward are we enhance the insurance level at the request of Steve to better protect both the city and also the owners of the business. And we also put, at the request of the concessionaire, we added some provisions in there related to if it's at some point in the future of the lease, they choose to sell the business or find another operator or something like that, how that process of change would be vetted by the city from that perspective. We also cleaned up some other hangover language that was in there related to utilities and some other things. The reason why there's 400 feet shown in there versus the 500. If you go into the structure, when you go in there, there's really what's perceived as 2 rooms. And the 400 square feet is the room that's on the south end, and that's the part of the building that is occupied by Romancing the Bean. The 100 square feet in the north side of the building is actually a city-operated facility that they help us manage that space indirectly. And the reason that they're split like that is because there are no public restrooms at this facility. If we were to put public restrooms in there, that would change the potential businesses. But in the eyes of the county health department, the business operation the licensure that they operate under is the same as basically a food cart or a food truck. That's how we comply from a regulatory standpoint with not having to add restrooms into the structure itself or attach them to the structure in some way. That is how we get around that. That's also how we sort of have gone through the process of settling on what the lease rate is versus other space, because the comparative spaces in this market are all fully operational spaces with restrooms elsewhere in the downtown envelope that we're talking about. That's all been vetted and confirmed with the health department. We're fine there. So that's all good with them. And so that's how we got to the lease that you see in front of you tonight. Terry's here if you have any questions about their business and how they operate their business. We've got provisions in there about the amount of time that they're going to be open. From a staff perspective, just a couple of things. We feel that it's important to have this structure occupied. Because if not, it could be a default homeless shelter or maybe a raccoon shelter. I'm not sure what, but there's a possibility of a number of things. So that's always very positive for us. It provides a good, consistent presence down there for a variety of customers. If you go and spend any time down there, you see the diversity of customer base that they have, from students to folks that are going to the Center for the Blind, as well as commuters and all those kind of things. So that's why it's important to us. They've done a good job in preserving the structure. They help us maintain that structure and business throughout the year. And so that's kind of where we are. The only bigger concern we have related to the structure of the staff is I've asked our facilities management staff to go through an investigatory process on the furnace that is in the building. It's been there a pretty long time, and it's starting to potentially get near the end of its lifespan. And so we, like a lot of the things, we just need to do an assessment of where we are with that. So that's really my only concern from a staff perspective about the building and the structure. And that would present some challenges for us if we had to replace the furnace, because under the new building code, we can't vent that through the existing chimney. So we'd have to go through a discussion of how you put an additional vent either vertically or out the side of the building, and that brings historic preservation in and a whole bunch of other things. So we need to get our hands around that whole challenge that's along with that. So with that, I'm willing to answer any questions. Terry's here to answer any questions if you'd like to as well from the business perspective.
Start over here.
Can you just tell me more about why there's no restroom there? Because it adds some other things, but what's wrong with putting in a restroom, even though it doesn't change the beam, does it?
It does not. I would, as someone, and Mark can speak to this as well, because we've talked about this. Public restrooms in a situation like that are going to be a significant maintenance and operational challenge for us as an organization.
Including
And I
the police
understand.
department.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's exciting enough there sometimes.
It can be a real challenge, having a public restroom.
Okay.
So that's kind of why, that's primary reason.
That makes a lot of sense. Cool, thanks.
Bill, you're next.
Two things. It says in terms of the agreement that the concessionaire has the exclusive right to review. And first of all, Terry and Jeannie have done a great job with this thing. And Terry, kudos to you and Jeannie both, because they're really active in the community. They provide coffee for the merchants meetings. They do a lot of things that kind of slide under the radar, but they're really an asset. Having said that, it says that they have the exclusive right to review. We're the landlords. I kind of like to.
Which provision are you referring to?
Under terms of the agreement, because what if something happens that changes that? If they have health issues that don't want to quite let go of it, and they aren't able to show up, or you just never know. And I'd like to see this go on forever, but it seems that as the landlords, we ought to have a say in that as well. Under terms of the agreement, third line, it says the concessionaire shall have the exclusive right to renew. It seems to me the city ought to have a say in that too. It ought to be a mutual agreement.
Steve and I can talk about that.
I'll get with the Public Works Director. I know right where you're coming from, council member, and obviously we need to talk with the NSC, but we can certainly do that. A lot of commercial leases, that would be the case, but this is also kind of an unusual building because of its historic nature, its location and things. So before this comes on the first read, the Public Works Director and I will sit down and we'll look through that.
And I totally trust that. I just thought it should be brought to our attention. On page 2, paragraph 5, it says, without discrimination as to race, color, or creed, and it had a conversation with the city attorney, so do you want to pass that on?
Yes, this is very old language. If I was writing this today, and again, this is going to get changed in the final lease, it would actually make reference to race, religion, national origin, disability, sexual or gender orientation, and it would basically cover all of the various protected classes. Right now, it doesn't. It's just old language, and we're going to update the language so it's consistent with our obligations under federal and state law.
Isn't that language still in the federal law?
No, the federal law actually would use there's an executive order that governs this, but it would basically say race, religion, national origin, gender, sex, disability, and in some federal matters where the president's issued executive orders, it would then say sexual orientation or gender orientation.
It'd be easy to say without discrimination.
Well, Attorney Kemp pointed out a really interesting thing, and you can explain it better than I can, but if you could rephrase how it used to be assumed that no kinds of discrimination were allowed, and then people used to chip away. It's kind of like okay to discriminate against you,
In a nutshell, if you went back historically and looked at the common law, which is basically the law of England before the United States was created, traditionally, when people had businesses, you were either a trespasser, a person without legal authorization, or you were what was known as an invitee. And today, these distinctions in most places have been eliminated. But the general idea was invitees had superior rights and could not be discriminated against. And in essence, if you were an invitee into a business and you were injured, the owner of that property was absolutely liable for all your injuries because you had this superior status of an invitee. Well, since the founding of the United States, and as we moved into statutory law, we began to get into this concept of, well, businesses had an ability to control their liability to invitees. If you actually went back to the historic common law, that wasn't the case. So we're kind of going full circle in a way, and if you ever want to have a long discussion about this, come see me, we'll get some great coffee from Romancing the Bean. We'll discuss the heritage of English common law and the rules of trespassers, invitees, and why they are so different and where they came from.
I didn't think we were going to get to the Washington administration and working backwards through time today. Like Carter, Eisenhower, Truman, and back to the Washington administration. So.
Yeah.
It's Grover Cleveland. It comes back to haunt you.
Right.
Two questions. One is on the 100 square feet. What's going on in there?
It's really related to under the provisions of business licensure for food carts or food trucks, you can't have any place you can sit down. And by breaking the space between the two rooms, that allows that space to the north, which we manage, has some seating. If that's contained in the southern 400 square feet, then that would not allow the permit to be executed under the county health code.
So is Romancing the Bean utilizing the full 500 square feet?
No, we kind of partner with them.
They don't use the seating area?
Their customers might, but they're moving into a space that we definitely work with them. We supply we work with them on the furniture, and it's also a space where we have, frankly, city propaganda in there, at some level. Some of the things, I'm sure there's a Tabor brochure right there now, I'm sure, or something along those lines. So that kind of space. If we move into, if they were to manage all of that space for us, it would provide a situation where more than likely it would null and void the option for the food cart licensure, and we would either have to add restrooms or find something else to do with the space. And we couldn't put employees in there, at least from our perspective, because there's no restrooms.
So My other question is that you stated that $1 a square foot is half the price of the going rate downtown. So I'd like to know
Okay.
why, I don't believe that there's anything downtown that goes for $2 a square foot. So what did you use as that?
I got that report directly from our economic development director. I asked her to query that, and I have that report sitting on my desk. So I took
Businesses downtown are paying $2 a square foot.
similar businesses.
A clarification on it, this is $1 a square foot a month. And when we hear about downtown leases, we're generally hearing about it in terms of a year. So $12, that'd be equivalent to $12 a year or equivalent of 24. But I still think it sounds low.
I don't necessarily disagree with that.
But if they have the data.
I can tell you that, this is my sense, is if we went out to the marketplace and put this out to the RFP, I'm not sure we would have takers. I'm willing to do that if council would like to do that. That wasn't the direction that council gave to staff earlier this year.
So it actually gets to my question, and Terry, thank you for your service to the community. So, as we look at this agreement, and it's probably meant as much for the city attorney on this, this is not a lease agreement, it's a concession agreement. And so there's, you might want to help us with the distinction, because this is saying you don't just get the space, you're actually going to operate a business with a purpose, with limitations in behalf of service. So it's a little bit different than a lease agreement. It's even though it talks about rental rates, it's actually a concession agreement.
Councilman Listener, members of the council, you're correct. Really, this is a two-tiered agreement. Yes, we are leasing some space, but it's also a concession agreement. And so you have both of those to deal with versus a straight-up lease where we just had a building where we'd calculate a cost per square foot in a commercial lease and say that's it. This is a concession agreement, and as Mr. Easter alluded to, the other issue here is this is not your typical commercial space that you would either lease or do a concession in, because of the lack of infrastructure, both restrooms and normally if you were going to lease this for a food service type thing, there would be some fairly significant plumbing as well. And none of that exists, so that all gets into how both the cost and the concession side of this gets structured.
Is there water in there? Is there plumbed water?
Yes, there's plumbed water. But it would be the equivalent of basically residential to some extent. It's not a commercial grade, you don't have grease separators, you don't have all that stuff. That would require a significant upgrade on our part as the building owner.
Doug?
What's the rate now?
400, it's consistent.
You know, to Bill's concern about the exclusive renewal, if we're going to modify that with any language, my preference would be that we would step in only on a failure to perform rather than just putting us in.
There is a provision in there at the tail end related to breach of contract, which, you know, there's certain provisions about operational hours and things like that. So those would fall under, I think, breach at least, but Steve can answer that. That's not my
What about
area of expertise.
such approval should not be unreasonably withheld? That type of thing.
The breach provision is, Steve, the breach provision
And
is
the breach
17.
provision is paragraph 17, and the city would have the right to, if the concessionaire breached the lease, or the concession agreement, the city would have the right to terminate the agreement and remove the concessionaire from the premises. Also on the subletting of the premises, the concessionaire has to obtain and provide at least 60 days notice to the city first of the proposed assignee, and secondly, the city has the right to consent to that consignee. So the city is making sure that for some reason, if this concessionaire were to sell the business, the city is going to have that authority.
And my follow-on question that I didn't get out yet, which is on the transfer, whether it's subletting or it's a sale of the business, and does, I know it goes to the city manager, but is the expectation that's built into the agreement that they would be subject to the same concession components that this does, as far as provision of food services and such?
Well, what it notes in paragraph 14 is that they would, if they sold the business to another party, they would have to provide the city manager with notice, and that the city has sole discretion to require additional vetting and financial information or on-site meetings or other due diligence prior to allowing or rejecting transfer. So consequently, we would certainly be looking at the proposed assignee in terms of whether they could adequately operate this concession, what their plans were. If, say, for example, a proposed assignee came in and said, well, we're only going to be open an hour a day, I think then the city would certainly be looking at this and saying, no, this isn't a type of assignee that we're prepared to give our consent to.
All I was asking was, is there an expectation that the follow-on will be a concession agreement with the same kind of expectation?
Yes, I think the intent would be that it would be both.
And you may want to fuzz around section 14 to make sure that that has that.
I'll take a look at section 14.
Let me ask Councilmember Cole, because she has a better shot.
Some of this is picky and some of it is, I don't understand. So on the first page with the whereases, the third whereas, it would be is desirous of continuing, I think, rather than in continuing. I've never heard of desirous in continuing, so that's a nitpicky one. In the term of agreement further down on the page, this agreement, the term of this agreement shall be for a period of one, then it says parentheses, 3 years. There's something not, is it a 1 3-year period?
It should be 1 3-year.
But that's not, I think, what it's saying.
Good point. It's a 3-year for once.
It
Yes,
does say
I mean,
17.
the term right now is proposed in the new agreement that there'd be an initial term. There's an error. It should say 3 years. It says 1 parent 3.
Yeah, so
It should say 3 parent 3, and we'll correct that.
Right, okay.
And it would be 3, then there'd be a right to
Oh, that's okay, it's
two
just
successive
changing
ones.
that 1 to 3,
Yeah,
right?
we'll change that 1 to 3.
Okay, then on the number 9, third page, concessionaire shall contract for and pay for all income taxes, employment taxes. I don't think it's or sales taxes. It'd be and sales taxes?
Well, yes, because those would be, in essence, there's 3 different types of taxes that conceivably the concessionaire could be subject to: income tax, employment taxes, assuming that they had employees and were paying payroll, or sales taxes, which the city imposes on the transaction.
So it is or? I
It
guess
is
I'm not
or.
understanding those kinds of taxes, but if that's what it is, I won't.
Because you might not have, say for example, the concessionaire had no employees, then they would have no employment taxes. So it's or, because conceivably it could be all of these, or it could be some of these.
Okay, as long as you say that's what it needs to be. Then number 12, concessionaire may operate said concession from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. or between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m.
We'll change that.
So it's one something there. Then my brain can't remember in number 13 what demised premises?
Yes, demise is an old legal term which means the subject premises.
That's okay.
That's what it means.
I should have looked it up and I didn't. And so I think that was That was all. And I would tell you, since I sometimes go down early in the morning on the train, I go down Denver, sometimes I go mid-afternoon, sometimes I go evening and come back. It is really nice having that facility there, really nice. And it's particularly nice having a historic structure there that is so much admired by a lot of visitors to the city.
Additional comments or concerns?
Just to follow up on Phil's point, can you clarify on the subletting clause 14? If you sublet something, the person you sublet to is subject to the original lease, aren't they? I mean,
Generally, they are subject to the original lease, and normally what there would be is that we would, my practice has always been when we had agreements like this where we actually had a subletting, we would do a formal agreement where they would agree to assume all of the responsibilities of the lease. So the subletting party is formally signed on to an agreement directly with us, because you don't want to have to be going through us having to sue this party, suing that party.
Cool. Well done.
There's one more on the first page of this at the bottom. Language in the lease has been cleaned up to align with actual, not actually, business practices. If we're cleaning up for regular reading.
Okay.
You see that, Mark?
Yeah, we got it. I know exactly where it's in bullet point 4.
Yeah.
Not seeing any more comments. I just would like to just close for a moment on this. That train depot sat between two sets of tracks on right by Main Street, right by the railroad depression, when originally it was picked up and moved. And I remember there was a lot of discussion in council, where the heck you can move this thing, and how far could you move it and not have it fall apart? It was a significant issue. The decision was made to move it up to Rio Grande, right by the location of that auxiliary parking lot by the county. And it sat there, and it was finished back, it was put back in some really nice shape. It finished back, but it sat totally vacant for, I'm guessing 10 years, that's just a guess. When light rail came through, council talked about, hey, you know, that depot really does fit right by light rail. That historically creates some closure on that. Let's pick it up and move it again. And it was moved. And when it was moved, there was really no idea of what it could be. I mean, this is why I want to compliment Terry. It was moved, and there was discussion, because I remember I was there for the meetings. We don't know why it's going to go there. We don't know what it's going to do. We don't know how the parking lot's going to relate to it. I mean, there were just so many unknowns. But there was just a positive attitude of, let's just put it there and see what happens. And Terry happened. Because was it not for somebody with your concern about the citizens, your care for the product that you present, your willingness to do all the things you do, that might have sat vacant like it did for 20 other years, and then for all the years that it sat before it was moved. So, Terry, thank you, because you make a big difference there. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll echo that. We've spent a lot of money on the building. It's a beautiful building. We're lucky to have it occupied, and it benefits the community for that to be there and to be occupied. So,
And what it can remind folks of is there was actually somewhere close to about 5 times the level of rail service between downtown Littleton and downtown Denver in the 1890s.
so that's the first thing I think of.
That's correct. Okay, with that, I don't have any other business. We're adjourned.
Thank you.